Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by Las Vegas Motor Speedway, America's racing showplace.
And he says, Dad, why don't you fly right seat, let Sam fly left seat? I'm going to sit back here and have a beer with my boys. You know, Ernie was adamant. I am not here to replace Davey Allison. And Robert and I jumped out of the car, and Steve come running over and said, guys, don't go over there. It's not good.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future.
So, Larry, you have 1992, and as bad as things got, there was always a tomorrow for Davey and the race team. July 1993, the world comes to an end. Is there any way to put into words what that day 2 or 3 and the next week and the next month was like for you?
Yeah, the thing on July 13th, 1993, I personally didn't just lose the driver that helped put me on the NASCAR map, that I was winning races with and contending for championships. That was minuscule. I lost my best friend. You know, in October of 1991, Linda and I, and Liz and Davey, because our two boys, Robbie and Brandon, were just a few months apart, we had them baptized together, and Linda and I are Robbie's godparents, and Davey and Liz are Brandon's godparents. Our friendship was beyond what you could imagine. So the driver crew chief relationship was just minor. But, you know, 93 started off rocky. It was a lesson learned. We were so invincible in 1992 that I think we got, for lack of better words, we got fat and lazy during the off season. We didn't work.
Really?
We didn't work to get better. We worked. Don't get me wrong. We worked night and day, but we just felt like we're ready for 93. We kicked their butt in 92 with torn up race cars and a driver that was hurt the majority of the year. All we need is a fresh sheet of paper and we're ready. And we even went to Daytona and looked like we didn't even know what was going on. Now, we did mess around and come back and win Richmond, which ended up being Davey's last win. But just the whole spring was just discombobulated. We were trying stuff and this didn't work. It's almost like we started throwing darts. But we were trying to play catch-up because we didn't work to get better. We rested on our laurels between 92 and 93. And the sad part is we took this brand-new race car to Loudon, and there was no question we hit on something. You know, had it not been for a late race caution, we're probably going to win that race. But it was a car with the combination we were running that it had to have long runs. And I knew when that damn caution came out with just a handful of laps to go that we were toast. And we ended up finishing third to Rusty and Mark. But still, we left there going, finally. We finally have honed in on what's been missing. And Robert and Joey Knuckles and Raymond Fox and myself, there were 3 or 4 or 5 of us. We did this on a pretty regular basis. Davey would leave Hueytown, stop in Charlotte, and pick us up in his plane, and we'd fly to the track. And then coming home, we'd fly back. He'd land in Charlotte, let us off, and he'd fly on to Hueytown. So I saw something different. You don't realize it when it's happening, but then when you reflect back how different this was. Because normally we'd get on that plane, and Eli Gold was on the plane with us. We'd get on that plane, and Bobby was on there, and, you know, Davy'd get left seat, Sam Mance would get right seat, and we'd all get in the back and fly home. And we got on that plane, and Davey was pretty darn happy about this run we had because, again, we were in a little bit of a funk. And he says, Dad, why don't you fly right seat, let Sam fly left seat? I'm going to sit back here and have a beer with my boys. And it's like I'd never seen this. I had never flown Davey Allison's plane that he wasn't flying left seat. So we sat back there and we cut up a little bit, but we talked about Loudon, Pocono coming up. Maybe we want to take this same car to Pocono, that we just ran at Loudon. And we got to Charlotte, and all of us except Sam and Davey and Bobby and Eli got off. And Davey and I always talked around 11 or 12 o'clock on Monday. And he says, hey, before I forget it, are you okay if we talk Tuesday? I'm going to fly up to Talladega tomorrow and watch David Bonnet, Neil's son, do an ARCA test. I said, yeah, we'll talk Tuesday. I said, I think we got a pretty good plan. I said, because we've talked for the last 2 hours. But I said, yeah, let's talk Tuesday. And, we're in the shop, and I remember Robert walking through that door like it was yesterday, and he was as white as that door right there, and he almost couldn't speak. And, Robert, he had that way of rubbing his hands through his hair, and he says, you need to come in the office. And he said, Davey's in trouble. Well, my initial feeling was, oh, God, what has he said or done now? He had a way sometimes of getting himself in a little bit of a crack about saying something he shouldn't have said. Yeah. And he said, no, he's crashed that helicopter. And, Robert and I and our 2 wives, Felix Sabatis was good enough to let us use his plane, and we flew down there. And, Liz, throughout the night until he passed away, she asked me several times, do you want to go see him? And I said, I don't. I want to remember him like he got off that airplane, or like when I got off that airplane. Because I just knew he was not going to make it. I wasn't giving up faith, but I just knew with what those doctors were saying. And I said, I don't want to remember him laying on a hospital bed with tubes and wires just being kept alive. That's not how I want to remember Davey Allison. I want to remember him sitting in that airplane having a beer and him aggravating the hell out of me about different things. That's how I want to remember him. And if I thought it would have made a difference, heck yeah, I'd have went back there and saw him. But I knew it wasn't, and I'm so glad and relieved today that I didn't. So Robert and Carolyn and Linda and I fly back to Charlotte Monday morning, and Robert and I go straight to the shop, and the guys are at the shop. And I'm sorry, this would have actually been Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday morning, and the guys were there at the shop just kind of lost, So we right then made the decision that we would not go to Pocono. I mean, Robert had to make a call to Ford. He had to make a call to Texaco, but that was a very short conversations. And we just made the decision not to go. And we knew that he was probably in heaven looking down at us going, you weak dogs. I cannot believe y'all are not going to go race. But he wasn't the one that was going to have to be in Pocono and deal with this with tears in your eyes and try to prepare a race car for a driver to drive off in a corner 170, 80 miles an hour. Just couldn't do it. Our heart was not going to be in it. And we're glad we made that decision. So we go to U.S. Airways. Actually, that's who was doing all the charter stuff back then. They actually created a charter flight. It was called Flight 28. And we flew to Birmingham and had the funeral on Thursday. Flew back, and it was so weird, Rick. None of us were related. Robert and Doug, of course, were. But we gathered at Robert's house Thursday night. All of us, our wives, our kids, just like a family gathers when a family member passes away. And that's what we needed. That was the beginning of our healing, was getting together as a family. And small race team, engine shop and all. I don't know if there were even 20 of us, but we gathered at Robert's house. And from Thursday through Monday, I just shut it down. I did not watch the Pocono race. Just Linda and I and the 2 kids just hung out at home with no phones, no nothing, just trying to begin this healing process. And I'll be honest, did the thought ever cross my mind, do I want to do it anymore?
You just read my mind. I was going to ask that. Yeah,
I did. It's like, okay, not only have I lost this race car driver, I lost my best friend. And I don't know, Davey, such a determined individual. And I remember he would fly that helicopter up there to Charlotte, and he'd say, let's go to lunch in a helicopter.
Nope.
I'm not getting in a helicopter with you, Davey. Why? I got my license. I said, you've got your license, but you don't have experience. You've got a license. You got a piece of paper. I said, I'll fly around the world 3 times with you in an airplane because you got experience. You got thousands of hours, but you don't have experience in that helicopter.
Wow. After that, at what point did the fog start to lift? And Ernie Irvan, when did he come into the picture? Was he your first choice, or were there maybe other people that you talked to?
I can't say I really knew.
Okay.
We were just trying to get through this, and Robbie Gordon, who was perfect to take to Talladega, because Robbie was not in the nucleus of NASCAR.
No, he wasn't. No.
And so it's going to take a pretty interesting, different individual to go to Talladega. Okay, Talladega, Davey's home,
Yeah.
where he was killed, to run his 28 car. And we wrecked early.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at Robert. Robert looked at me and said, we don't want to fix it. We got a good opportunity to get out of here. And so we loaded up and went back to Charlotte. And, you know, we had a lot of different drivers that drove some races for us. Lake Speed, you know, drove some races. And I really felt bad for Lake. Lake was great to put in that car. He's so spiritual, always upbeat, not down. I think we all knew he was probably not our long-term answer, but he was perfect for a short term with what we were going through as a race team. And I really felt bad for Lake because we had went to Darlington, and Lake runs good at Darlington, as we know. It's where he won that race. And we really had a good test. But in the interim, between that Darlington test and checking in at Darlington the following week is when the thing got to put together with Ernie. I think that all kind of started in early mid-August conversation with Ernie, and it was really instigated by Ford. And, you know, when Robert ran it by me, I went, that's a no-brainer. Are you kidding me? We can get Ernie Irvin? I said, you know, and a lot of people were anti-Ernie. The Allisons were anti-Ernie.
Were they
Bobby
really?
Allison was really against it.
Wow.
But I felt like that we could calm him down. We would give him a fast race car where he wouldn't have to maybe overextend equipment, and that we could lasso this wild bucking bronco, which is about what he was. And, you know, when we went to Darlington, we had his seat in the car, but he still, when the garage opened Thursday morning, I think it was back then, he still was not out of his contract with Morgan McClure. It wasn't just a handful of minutes before practice that he was released. But it didn't take me long to realize this is exactly what we need. You know, he's so different from Davey, night and day difference. But, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. And we ended up finishing 4th or 5th in that Darlington race. And that's when the track was flip-flop back the old way, and we were pitting almost right at the start-finish line on what's now the backstretch. And halfway through that race, you know, Ernie said very little on radio. He didn't talk on radio much at all. But he was running behind Earnhardt, and right at the start-finish line, he picked the rear wheels of that 3-car up off the ground. Earnhardt looked like an octopus in there. So we finished 4th or 5th. I think we finished 5th.
Yeah.
And after the race, I said, man, you had no 3-car jacked up there one time. He said, did you see it? He said, I tried to time it where it'd be right in front of y'all. But that was just Ernie Irvin. But the neatest thing that I'll ever remember is we go to Martinsville, and he'd been driving the car, 3 or 4 races, and we sat on the outside the front row, and led that thing all day long. And it was hot, God almighty.
Yes, it was.
It was 95 something degrees with probably about 110 degrees heat index.
Yeah.
And we won the race. I think we might have led over 400 laps, something close to it.
You whooped them, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was one of those days when you felt like the only group that could beat you is if you beat yourself. And I remember we were pitting right down near the end of the front stretch. That was back in the course of the 2 pit roads. And when Ernie took the checkered flag and was coming back around and was going to come down pit road, because Victory Lane back then was kind of down in the middle of 1 and 2, I saw somebody walk out on pit road, and I kind of looked, Bobby Allison. And he went out there and did like that to Ernie. And I went, that's exactly what we needed to see. We wanted the Allisons to be okay with this. Mm-hmm. Bobby Allison knew that's what we needed. And then the other thing was in Victory Lane, again, so flipping hot. Ernie sat down beside the car most of the Victory Lane. Unannounced to anybody. Not me, not Robert, not Brian Vandercook, our PR guy. I'm talking nobody. He pulled his uniform top down, and his T-shirt said, "In memory of Davey Allison." It's like...
You didn't know he had it on?
Nobody knew it.
Really?
Nobody knew it. He had put it on when he put his uniform on, and I mean, it wasn't like when he pulled his top down, he went, look at me.
Yeah.
He just pulled it down, and there it was. And it's like this couldn't work no better. Ernie was adamant. I am not here to replace Davey Allison. I'm here to do my job. He wanted things different. He wanted a different uniform. He wanted a different helmet. We even changed the font of the numbers a little bit in the Ernie Irvin era. And, of course, then the next week, I mean, I know Truex whipped up on him a few years ago out there at the Coke 600. I know Kyle Busch whipped up on him, but that butt kicking that next week at Charlotte, I mean, we led 328 of 334 laps, all but 6 laps. And the only reason we didn't lead those was through cycle of green flag pit stops. I mean, he sat on the outside of the front row, and I think we took the lead before they got to turn 1. And it's like, couldn't wait. We still had more races. Now, we didn't win any more in 93, but it's like, are you kidding me? I wish 1994 started the Monday after the 93 season ended.
Yeah. Speaking of 1994, you're rolling along, you're doing well, you're winning races, and going into Michigan, you're 27 points behind Dale Earnhardt. So you're neck and neck. It's just the two of you in contention for the championship. You go into the practice, and Ernie has his accident. At what point did you grasp how serious the accident was?
Yeah, we had this just goes to show you how stout that we were that year. I think we'd had our worst qualifying effort of the year. And it was probably something like 13th or 14th or something. And that was pretty bad to us in our book. That was the thing that I think, which it was the same thing with Davey and I, but Ernie Irvin and I, we went there in our race team, not just Ernie and I, our race, we wanted to sit on every pole, lead every lap, win every practice, and win every race. And anything short of that, we felt like we could get better. And, even that Charlotte race, how come we didn't sit on the pole? What did we miss that kept us off the pole? But I went over to Ernie's motorhome that night before going back to the hotel, and the car had been real loose qualifying. And I said, Ernie, I'm pretty sure when we untape this thing that it's probably going to be way too tight, even though it was loose qualifying. But I said, if you're okay, just so we can get our baseline, let's just untape this thing, put some decent tires on it, and just make a 10 or 12 lap run in the morning, and let's see where we're at. And of course, back then, the Durham practice was right after the sun came up, the first one. It's like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And sure enough, he left pit road, and we made a 10-lap run, and I knew I should have called him in about lap 6 or 7. Stopwatch, it's like we got work to do. We're not even close. And Ernie had this technique that if we made a 10-lap run, he'd run 10 laps, and then he'd just carry the mail through 1 and 2, and then he'd come in. He wanted to get one last feel of that race car. And I remember completing the 10th lap. It was real hazy or foggy. And campfires, you couldn't even hardly see the backstretch. And Raymond Fox was kind of standing up on the platform of the deck up top, and I was just kind of standing on the floor. And I remember him running 10 laps, and I said, Ernie, that thing looks like it's way too tight. Bring it on in here. He said 10-4, but he did that deal. He ran through 1 and 2. And all of a sudden, I looked and I saw the caution flag waving. And I went, Ernie, caution's out. And Raymond Fox looked around me and went, I said, what? He said, it's us. So I scaled down off the hauler, and Robert scaled down off the hauler. And we ran to the NASCAR hauler. I saw Buster Alton just leap out of that hauler. And you could tell he was in a panic. He was going to the pace car. And I said, Buster, can we ride over there with you? He said, come on, get in now. So we hauled mail around there, and as we pulled up to where the car was, it was sitting just up on the back straightaway, just right against the back wall. And as we pulled up, I went, car doesn't look bad. Car doesn't look bad at all. So Steve Peterson with NASCAR, he had already got there. And Robert and I jumped out of the car, and Steve come running over and said, guys, don't go over there. It's not good.
Really?
And it's like, I was in a state of shock. It's like there's just no way under the sun this has happened. We buckle these guys in every week before they say, driver, start your engines, and there's a risk. This is a practice session. A practice session on Saturday morning. How in the world has this happened? And here's another classic story of camaraderie in that garage area. You said it, us and the 3.
Yeah.
They take the lead one week, we take it the next week. Well, we're kind of definitely miscombobulated. It's like we don't even know which ends up. They're airlifting Ernie out of there. Well, by the time we finally got all of our bearings and all of our senses, and Ernie had left the track on the helicopter, and Robert and I are going to go to the hospital, the 3 bunch, because practice had ended, and it was they had unloaded our backup car and put it in our garage stall and put it on jack stands where NASCAR could go ahead and inspect it for us.
Did they really?
Just trying to help us out.
The 3 guys?
The 3 guys did. Chocolate, I think, led the brigade. Just goes to show you that way that garage area is. But
I'd never heard that.
Yeah, Robert and I, of course, went to the hospital, and we were in the waiting room late afternoon, early evening, and Dr. Erlinson, I still remember his name, who was the neurologist, he came in, and it was Kim and Vic Irvin, Ernie's dad, and myself and Robert. And the look on his face, he really didn't need to say much. The look on his face pretty much told us the tale. He says, right now, he said, we're touch and go, but he says, I would say we're looking at about a 20 or 25% rate of survival. And, it's like, how in the world can this happen?
I asked you this about 1993, and I'm going to ask it again. So, was there ever a point where you said, okay, that's it. I'm striking the tents.
Yeah.
And going finding something else to do.
If Ernie Irvin had passed away with confidence, I say absolutely that would have been the deal. I don't think I'd ever laid hands on a race car again. But once we knew at least Ernie was going to survive, we didn't know about his status as far as driving a race car.
Right.
But then, he came back to Charlotte and started recovering there. And I remember sitting in his hospital room, and he says, y'all be there for me, won't you? And I said, Ernie Irvin, that car, and to the best of my ability, every member of that race team will still be there when you come back and start driving again. And that was a pretty tall. I looked at myself, boy, you just really bit off a lot here. I hope you can live up to what you just said to him. But I meant it as long as it was things that I could control. The only thing I could control was myself, that I would not leave there. And honestly, I got a lot of phone calls, Rick, because I think people knew that I was probably ready to just start over. You know, Roger Penske called me, and evidently Roger don't study time zones too close. I think he was in Bangladesh or something, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and Roger Penske called me and about doing the 2-car. And I said, Roger, as flattering as this is, and I know I could come over and we could win some races and win a championship, I said, I made a commitment to a man that I'd be here when he comes back, and I'm going to live up to that commitment. And he says, Larry, that's as commendable as you can be. If you gave a man's word and looked him in the eye, he said, even now, if you told me you'd take this job, I'd tell you not to.
So you have another decision to make as far as who to put in the 28 car. And I think you told me at one point that Dale Earnhardt actually had an offer on the table. How serious was that? Was that?
I don't know if it was him and Don Hawk, just treading the waters, kicking the tires, seeing what else was out there, or maybe finding something they could go back and leverage Goodwrench and RCR. I never really was involved in those conversations. But, you know, it became evident in late 94 that Ernie was going to survive, and that eventually he was going to be able to come back and drive a race car. Now, in his mind, it was going to be for Daytona 500 1995. I mean, I remember being at the Waldorf Astoria at the banquet week at the end of 94, and we were in a suite, and it was Robert, myself, and Ernie and Kim Irvin, and it was somebody from Ford, somebody from Texaco, and we were trying to make sure Ernie was involved in our plan. We didn't want to just pick up the phone and say, Ernie, here's who we've got to drive the 28 car. We wanted him to be a part of this process. And he looked at us, and Kim was supporting him. It's my car. I'm running Daytona. That's not what we think's going to happen, Ernie. You know, we're being told that that's not going to happen. We've got to come up with a 1-year plan, and that we already have started having conversations. If you can come back on into the season, that we will figure out how to field a second car, but you're not going to run the Daytona 500. And it was some pretty spirited, heated conversations. Because I got a contract, and it says I'm the driver of Robert Yates Racing, which I applaud to some degree. Yeah. It just showed his passion. But a funny story. So we come up with a plan with Dale Jarrett. I'm not sure Ernie was on board with that, but he wasn't going to be on board with anybody just because. You know, we could have got Mario Andretti, and he was going to say Mario can't drive a race car. So, but that's okay. You understand that. But by January, Ernie was actually doing pretty good, and we were down there testing at Daytona. And you know how the old garages used to be, and you could kind of spread out in there and not be right on top of each other, you know, because all that was there was Fords. And we were kind of in that one back garage there, kind of in the back. And I can't believe we schemed this plan. Pulled our team van in the garage area to kind of block the rest of the garage area. Dale Jarrett made a run, pulled in, got out of the car, and went up in the van. Ernie Irvin came out of the van in a driver's uniform and a helmet and got in the car and ran about 5 laps at the test at the beginning of 95 at Daytona. I mean, we were probably not very smart doing that. I mean, he had not really been released, but he wanted to do it. And you know what? we wanted to let him do it. And I never will. When I finally saw that thing coming off the racetrack, it felt like the weight of the world, because I'm telling you, if you'd have thumped me, I'd have probably split in half while he was out there making these laps, even though he's just by himself.
Holy cow, man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That could have been big.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we go into 95, and we're not running very good. I mean, we did go to Daytona and sit on the pole for the 500. We ended up finishing 5th. But it's the damn hardest I've ever fought, I think, for a 5th place finish in all my life. We just were not running good.
Yeah.
And I learned a life lesson in those first 8 or 10 races. The problem was myself and Dale. I was being hard-headed. One, I was missing Ernie Irvin. And I was being hard-headed and basically looking at Dale, not verbatim, but for a choice of words, look, we won races, sat on poles, and led laps. You got to figure out how to drive this thing. Dale Jarrett, kind of being the meek and humble individual that he is, these guys won races and led laps and sat on poles. I need to figure out how to drive it. We were on a highway to nowhere.
Yeah.
And honestly, I was about ready to tell Robert, find somebody else. I mean, not talking about Dale, talking about myself.
Right.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
Can't do it. And it took all the way to the Coke 600 weekend before we finally got on track. And what it took, we were struggling our guts out. And Robert was trying to help, but I don't think he knew how to really help. You know, Robert wasn't one of those owners that got in there and you need to do this and you need to do this, and that just wasn't Robert. And Robert says, you want to get somebody to run a few laps in the car? And I said, absolutely. He said, let me go down there and get Hut Strickland to come down here and run it a few laps. So Hut came down there, and I told Dale, I said, Dale, before he gets in it, why don't you kind of tell him what you've been feeling? You know, it wasn't like Dale and I were at each other. We just wasn't communicating about the race car like we needed to be communicating. And so Hut got in there, and he didn't run no faster than Dale, which if he had, that might have been even a bigger problem.
Yeah.
But he came in, and he says, man, this. Okay, let's go to work on it. We worked on it. So it was a wake-up call for me, because all I was looking for is somebody to be adamant about what the car's doing, and let's go to work on it. And Dale needed to see somebody that was adamant about telling us about the race car. And it fixed us. We go to Pocono, 2 or 3 weeks later, win the race up there. It's the only race we won, but we were competitive the rest of the year. And then, of course, the neatest thing is finally Ernie gets to come back, and we get to run Wilkesboro, Phoenix, and Atlanta with him. But Dale took that deal knowing it was just a one race deal. But there was a lot of other layers to it. Dale was wanting to do his own cup team. And he knew this was a good bridge to be able to do this. He had his own Xfinity Series team. So
maybe open the door with Ford, maybe?
Ford.
Yeah.
Yates engines,
okay.
A lot of things.
Okay.
There was a lot of layers that, he took a gamble and left Joe Gibbs and came to Yates knowing it was a 1-year deal and 1-year deal only, especially once we knew Ernie was coming back. But Ford was just wearing Robert out about starting a second team. They wanted to really go up against the Hendrick multi-car teams, the other teams that were doing, back then, 2 cars was a lot of cars. But Robert, I'm not doing a second team. His philosophy, when they make Victory Lane big enough to pull 2 cars in, I'll think about doing 2 teams. But economically, it made just really good sense. And, Robert and I had a lot of lengthy conversations. I don't know that I was high on him starting a second team, but I knew the support that we could get, that it would only elevate both race teams. So he made the decision to do it. Dale Jarrett was never on the radar to drive it. Never even in a conversation. Dale basically had a letter of intent from Hooters. He's starting his.
Did he?
He's starting his own team. So we're at Michigan in August. Ironically, Michigan in August, and we had led the race and led it, and had an engine failure. 30, 40 laps to go. And Robert and I are in the rental car by ourselves, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. We're pulling out of the infield. Robert's driving. I'm in the passenger seat, and we're just about to go through the tunnel in turn one. I said, Robert, we're not very freaking smart. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're running all over the place like a chicken with your head cut off, trying to find a driver for the second car. You're looking everywhere under the sun. We've got the driver we need right here under our nose. And he went, Jarrett? I went, no question. There is no question. I said, I realize you're probably surprised hearing that from me, considering what we went through the first third of this year.
Yeah.
That man can drive a race car. And there was other things, that was getting a little bit iffy on his starting his own deal. A man with 3 young kids and a Hooters sponsorship with what Hooters was going to ask of him, doesn't perfectly line up. So I think there was some apprehension on he and Kelly's part about this whole Hooters sponsorship deal. So I think by the time we got to Bristol, a week or two after Michigan, Dale was signed to drive the 88 car. But to your question, yeah, I think Don Hawk reached out to Robert right around halfway through 95 about Earnhardt. But there was 2 stipulations. He didn't want to drive no 88 car. He wanted to drive that 28. And it's my understanding he wanted $1 million to drive the car, which is kind of, I chuckle now because there's guys that's never even finished in the top 20 that's making $1 million now.
You said it, I didn't.
But, Robert says, I can't offer you the 28 car. It's Ernie Irvan's car. I can offer you that 88. And so that was kind of the deal breaker right there. He wanted to drive that black 28.
If he could have gotten the 28 car, how likely?
I don't know how they were going to deal with a salary deal. Nobody.
Okay,
I mean, he may have been making $1 million at the 3 car. I don't know. That's not for me to say he was or he wasn't. But he wasn't going to make that driving for Robert Yates Racing.